The 28th Battalion, also known as the Māori Battalion, was a formidable force within the New Zealand 2nd Division during World War II. Comprising 900 men of Maori descent, the battalion was widely considered to be one of the most courageous and tenacious units within the British Army. Their fierce determination and a relentless spirit made them a formidable force on the battlefield, striking fear into the hearts of the Wehrmacht soldiers. Erwin Rommel, the renowned German tactician, is said to have remarked after facing the Maori Battalion in the North African campaign, "Give me the Maori Battalion and I will conquer the world." Though this statement is likely apocryphal and can be attributed to his Chief of Staff General Siegfried Westphal at a 1972 Africa Corps reunion dinner, Rommel's respect for the Maori troops is well documented. In his memoirs, he recounts the Maori troops as among the elite of the British Army, and expresses his wish that they had been captured and held in prison camps instead of facing his forces on the battlefield. The Maori Battalion was regarded as the finest unit within the 2nd Division, and both Axis and Allied forces alike marveled at their wild bravery. They were the most decorated unit in the division, earning 2 Victoria Crosses. Lance Sergeant Hane Manahi was even awarded a Sword of Gallantry by Queen Elizabeth II. 2nd Division Commander General Freiberg stated, "No infantry had a more distinguished record, or saw more fighting, or, alas, had such heavy casualties, as the Maori Battalion." The proposal to establish a Maori Battalion was met with great enthusiasm within the Maori community in New Zealand. Despite some concerns about Maori soldiers fighting for a foreign empire, many saw it as a chance to promote equality and representation for the Maori community in New Zealand politics. Following New Zealand's official declaration of war against Nazi Germany on September 2, 1939, in response to calls from prominent Maori leaders like Sir Aparana Nagata, the government agreed to the formation of the Maori Battalion by October of the same year. Initially, the battalion was composed of both Maori and non-Maori soldiers, but as Maori recruits were trained, they eventually took on officer roles within the battalion. In World War I, around 2,227 Maori and 458 Pacific Islanders served in the Maori Pioneer Battalion, which specialized in engineering and construction tasks, laying wire entanglements, farming, and trench digging, some of the least glamorous work of the war. However, the new 28th Battalion was created specifically as an elite frontline infantry unit that would be relied upon to undertake critical combat missions. One soldier explained their formation into an infantry battalion as a natural part of their culture, which venerated, above all else, the glory of the warrior. Their request could not be denied them by their elders and chieftains. All their long history had been steeped in the religion of war, and the training of the Maori child from his infancy to manhood was aimed at the perfection of the warrior class, while to die in the pursuit of the war god Tumatatanga was a sacred duty and a manly death. The Maori mixed many of their cultural traditions and practices with those of the New Zealand Army. The British officers noted that their communal and brotherly way of life made them naturally adapted to camp life, in which people ate, slept, and worked together, holding many objects in common. Selected officers and NCOs began training at Trentham in November 1939, and the battalion first assembled at Palmerston North on 26 January 1940. On 2nd of May 1940, after 3 months of training, the Maori Battalion's main body left Wellington with the second echelon of 2nd New Zealand Expeditionary Forces aboard the luxury liner Aquitania. The Maori Battalion usually had around 700 to 750 men, divided into 5 companies, 4 rifle companies of about 125 men each, and a headquarters company of around 200 men. Each company was commanded by a major or captain. The battalion's 4 rifle companies, named A, B, C, and D, were organized along tribal lines. For example, A, or the Gum Diggers, were drawn from Northland to Auckland. B Company, the Penny Divers, were from Rotorua and the Bay of Plenty. C Company, the Cowboys, were from the East Coast, and D Company, known as Walkabout, were from Waikato, Hawke's Bay, Wellington, and the South Island, as well as some Pacific Islands and the Chatham and Stewart Islands. The HQ Company drew its personnel from all over Maoridom. After spending time deployed as garrison troops in the UK and France, the 28th Māori Battalion had its first brief engagement in late March 1941. The battalion participated in the ill-fated British invasion of Greece, where they, along with the rest of the New Zealand troops, fought a valiant retreat from Mount Olympus. Despite their efforts, they were evacuated from Athens by ship on April 21, 1941, as the disastrous campaign came to an end. The Māori Battalion next saw action as they battled the Wehrmacht crack Fallschirmjäger in their daring air assault on the island of Crete. In one engagement near 42nd Street, near Soda Bay, the Maori bayonets charged a German mountain assault unit and claimed 80 casualties for the loss of 4 of their own. As they charged into battle, bayonets fixed, they shouted, "Kamite, Kamite," which translates to, "I may die, I may die." These words were taken from the Kamite Haka composed by Chief Te Ramoraha in the 1840s. Next, in the Haka, comes the words, "Ke ora, I may live, I may live." The message is clear. Maori warriors expect death before life. The headlong bayonet charge would become a staple of the Maori combat style, which relied on daring shock assaults that could sweep away enemy defenses quickly. Although the Battle of Crete was an Allied loss, 42nd Street and other valiant rearguard actions helped the Allied forces withdraw across Crete's rugged mountains to the southern coast, from where they could escape to Egypt. By the 31st of May, 1941, more than 16,000 Allied troops, including the Maoris, were evacuated safely by the Royal Navy. Now stationed in Egypt, the Maori Battalion were about to fight in the Desert Campaign, which would make them famous. Moving to Syria to spend time guarding a possible German invasion from the north, the Maori Battalion rejoined the British 8th Army in the Western Desert on the 14th of June, 1942. By the 26th of June, they were rushed into the line at Minkar Kaim. They swiftly found themselves surrounded by Rommel's 21st Panzer Division and were forced to break out of German lines in a 160-kilometer dash back to the safety of the Alamein line. Soon, an obscure railway station called El Alamein was to enter history as the scene of the decisive battle of the Desert War. The 8th Army's offensive began on the 23rd of October, 1942, with a massive artillery barrage, but Axis forces held firm. A second thrust on the 2nd November cost the Maori Battalion 100 casualties. When his defenses were breached elsewhere, Rommel was forced to withdraw. The desert stalemate turned into a headlong pursuit. On the 23rd of January, 1943, the Maori Battalion became the second New Zealand unit to enter Tripoli, 2,250 kilometers to the west of El Alamein. On the 1st of March, 1943, the Maori Battalion helped beat off a determined German counterattack at Medellin in Tunisia. The New Zealanders' next task was a sweeping left hook inland to seize Tobago Gap and outflank the enemy's Mareth line. The battalion's objectives were Point 209 and a foothill the Maori named Hikurangi. Led by Captain Peter Aotearoa, C Company seized the latter on 26th of March and held it throughout a night of desperate counterattacks from Panzer Grenadiers. Point 209 fell the next day, with 231 German prisoners taken. The Maori Battalion had suffered almost 100 casualties, including 22 dead. Among the fallen was 2nd Lieutenant T. Moanawi Akiwa Nagaramu, who inspired leadership would earn him a posthumous Victoria Cross. Leading his men up the hill into hand-to-hand fighting, he held it against ruthless German counterattacks, finally falling in the morning as reinforcements were arriving. The London Gazette reports he was, quote, killed on his feet, defiantly facing the enemy with his Tommy gun at his hip. As he fell, he came to rest almost on top of those of the enemy who had fallen. The number of whom survived testified to his outstanding courage and fortitude. Back home in New Zealand, Negaramu was hailed as a hero, and more than 7,000 people attended a celebratory event for his VC, described by the commentator as one of the greatest Maori assemblies of the century. Next up for the tireless 28th Battalion was the 200-meter high rock fortress of Takaruna, held by Italian and German troops. It blocked the 8th Army's drive towards Tunis. On the night of the 19th of April, 1943, a handful of B Company men, led by Sergeant Hane Manahi, scaled a sheer cliff face to reach the summit. Others followed, and after 3 days of desperate fighting, Takaruna's defenders were finally overcome. 300 prisoners were taken, but the battalion lost another 116 men, killed or wounded. Manahi was awarded the Distinguished Conduct Medal, but many felt he deserved a VC for leading an assault described by a British Lieutenant General, Sir Brian Horrocks, as the most gallant feat of arms eyewitness in the course of the war. On the 13th of May, 1943, Axis resistance in North Africa collapsed, leading to the surrender of 238,000 German and Italian troops. 2 days later, the New Zealanders began the almost 3,000-kilometer trek back to their base in Egypt. 18 months of desert warfare had cemented the Maori Battalion's reputation as some of the finest shock infantry in the world. Between their battles and soldierly duties, the men of the 28th Battalion had ample time to bond and enjoy themselves. In the words of 2nd Lieutenant Waka, to laze around doing nothing, to walk around without fear of getting blown sky high by shells, to sleep above ground in a comfortable bed, to sit at a table and eat every kind of delicious food, to drink beer by the any amount you like, to know there's not a German within 50 miles of one, all these things seem to make life almost a dream. Their camp life was a unique blend of Maori social norms and the discipline and rigor of British Army life. The soldiers welcomed opportunities for recreation and excelled in various sports, particularly swimming, rowing, boxing, tug-of-war, hockey, and rugby. In 1940, while stationed in Britain, a team from the 28th Battalion was invited to play against a Welsh XV at Cardiff, ultimately losing 12-3. However, in 1943, the battalion achieved victory in the 2nd New Zealand Division's highly competitive rugby tournament held in Tripoli, defeating the divisional signals team 8-6 in the final. Entertainment and music were important distractions from the stresses of combat. The Kiwi Concert Party put on shows, and mobile cinema units screened popular movies and newsreels in the field. The battalion's own concert parties regularly entertained 8th Army troops with singing and the haka, their traditional war dance. A chaplain was designated to provide spiritual support to the soldiers, and he performed ceremonies and prayers in line with traditional Maori spiritual practices, such as the karakia. Additionally, the chaplain blessed the battalion's equipment and vehicles before they went into battle. Another significant cultural custom was the use of tattoos, or tamoko, which were used to identify soldiers and express their cultural identity. Many soldiers had these tattoos applied while in training or on leave. Despite the technological advancements of World War II, many soldiers of the 28th Battalion retained a familiarity with their own traditional weapons, such as the taha, a close-quarters combat staff, the patu, a handheld club, and the pauenua, a rawhide shield. A notable instance of this was when Aubrey Rhoda was able to use the taiha to win a melee competition at the Small Arms Weapon Training School in Mahdi, the Middle East, in 1943, against opponents from every corner of the British Empire who chose to use bayonets. The Maori Battalion arrived in Italy in October 1943. The Italians had surrendered to the Allies the previous month, but the country was now occupied by the Germans, who would resist staunchly until May 1945. The change from Egypt was dramatic as a cold and wet winter closed in. The Maori Battalion returned to action at Arsogna on 7th December 1943. Some gains were made in bitter hand-to-hand fighting, but at Christmas, the town remained under German control. Of all the battles involving the Maori Battalion in the Second World War, none was more brutal or costly than the struggle for Monte Cassino in early 1944. The towering 500-meter Monte Cassino, topped by a Benedictine monastery, dominated the route to Rome through the Liri Valley. Below it lay the Rapido River and the heavily defended town of Cassino. Several Allied attacks had failed before the New Zealanders arrived. On the night of the 17th of February 1944, the Maori Battalion attacked the town's railway station. But when supporting tanks were unable to get through, they were forced to withdraw under heavy fire. A and B companies suffered terrible losses, with 128 out of 200 men killed, wounded, or captured, a 64% casualty rate. After another unsuccessful attack in March, which saw desperate close-range fighting in the ruins of the town, the New Zealanders were withdrawn in early April. Cassino eventually fell to Polish troops in mid-May 1944. After a period of rest and recovery, the New Zealand Division returned to the front line in July 1944. The 28th Māori Battalion played a prominent role in the advance on Florence, being the first unit to reach the outskirts of the city on August 4th. As the war progressed, the battalion took part in a pursuit operation, crossing the Senio, Saturno, Salero, Edici, and Po rivers with little resistance. The war eventually came to an end with the New Zealand Division stationed in Trieste, near the border with present-day Slovenia. There, they were faced with a tense standoff with an Allied force. Tito's Yugoslav partisans, who had hoped to occupy the city and incorporate it into Yugoslavia after the war. Whilst in Italy, the Maori picked up the language easily, and Italian songs like Buona notte mio amore became part of the battalion's repertoire. Many Maori felt at home among the warm-hearted Italian country folk, and some formed relationships with local women. More than a few tears were shed when the battalion finally departed Italy in December 1945. In total, almost 3,600 men served overseas with the Maori Battalion between 1940 and 1945. Of these, 649 were killed in action or died on active service. More than 10% of the 6,068 New Zealanders who lost their lives serving with 2nd New Zealand Expeditionary Force in the Middle East and Europe. In addition, 1,712 men were wounded and 237 were prisoners of war, giving them a casualty rate of around 65%, an unprecedented figure for a unit which was never destroyed or suffered serious defeat. This casualty rate was almost 50% higher than the average for the New Zealand infantry battalions. Throughout the war, groups of fresh recruits were regularly sent from New Zealand to replenish these heavy losses. Many Maori also served with other units in the 2nd New Zealand Division, with the 3rd New Zealand Division in the Pacific and New Zealand-based Army units and in the Home Guard. Others served with the Air Force, Navy, and Merchant Navy. Some Maori women served in the Army Nursing Service and the Women's Army, Air Force, and Navy auxiliaries. Between 1939 and 1945, almost 16,000 Maori volunteered for war service out of a total population of 100,000, a phenomenal feat of devotion and service. After the end of World War II, the 28th Māori Battalion sailed for home on Boxing Day, 1945. Upon their arrival in Wellington on January 23, 1946, the 780 troops were welcomed as returning heroes and dispersed to their home marae throughout the country. Their commander, Lieutenant Colonel James Hanare, dismissed his men with these words: "Go back to our mountains. Go back to our people. Go back to our marae. But this is my last command to you all. Stand as Maori. Stand as Maori. Stand as Maori." The Maori community had lost many young men, and many more would leave their communities in search of work opportunities in the cities, changing the fabric of Maori society forever. The war had also had an impact on race relations, as Maori soldiers had gained the respect of their Pakeha, non-Maori comrades, and the future of the Maori as a respected part of the New Zealand population was seen as less uncertain. Despite the losses and the challenges ahead, the service of the 28th Māori Battalion had played a significant role in shaping a positive future for the Maori community in New Zealand, in defeating the Nazi menace, and proving themselves as amongst the bravest soldiers who walked the earth.